Hola, mi nombre es Karen Méndez y formo parte de la comunidad de Drupal Costa Rica. Estoy aquí para extenderle una cordial invitación al DrupalCamp 2021. Este año también se hará de modalidad virtual en la plataforma de hopping.com, donde contaremos con talleres y charlas de nivel intermedio, avanzado y básico para que puedas aprender más sobre Drupal. También habrá un chat en línea para que puedan consultar todas sus dudas con los expertos. Muchas gracias a los patrocinadores de este año.
DrupalCamp Costa Rica 2021 con la plataforma Hopping.
No olviden visitar los stands de nuestros patrocinadores y recuerden visitar nuestro sitio web DrupalCamp.cr.
If you want, you can start it. I will be here behind the stage.
Okay, sounds good.
See you. Bye. You can start now. Bye.
Bye. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. I'm gonna chat today about making UX choices as Drupal developers. Just to introduce myself, my name's Suzanne Dargacheva, and I'm one of the co-founders of Evolving Web. We are an agency in Montreal specializing in Drupal. I realize that my slides are a little choppy, so I'm going to switch to using Chrome, so just bear with me. Stop sharing for a second. So yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm one of the co-founders of Evolving Web. We're a Canadian-based Drupal agency, and one of the things that I love doing, I'm on the Promote Drupal initiative for the Drupal Association, so I help market Drupal. But I've also, over the years, done all the roles on Drupal projects, like I've been a themer, like front-end developer, back-end developer. I've done some design work, and I really like teaching Drupal. And I'll skip over a little bit. Evolving Web, you can learn more about us. We work with lots of really interesting organizations that make an impact in the world, a lot of institutions, universities, and we really love what we do. So today we're going to really delve into user experience design from a developer's perspective. Because I think as developers, when we're working on projects, we're often making a lot of decisions about the user experience. Even though it might not be part of our official job description, a lot of things are left up to us. And so this is partly because when you think about just how we use technology, you know, everything has a user experience, and our job is really to make that experience good. And so some of these things, of course, are taken care of in the design phase when we're thinking about what something's visually going to look like. But user experience design is also related to how things feel like and how things work. And the best experiences are experiences where we get what we want, where things are actually working as we expect. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about the mechanics of that today. It's really common to think that a good user experience is just one that makes users happy. So like we all want to use apps that are like making us feel better. We all want to have like nice imagery to look at and just things that look appealing. And when we think about things like the way that Apple's changed design and just making things designed in a more simple way, that often is something that makes users happier. But often our job is actually not just to make users happy, but actually to get them to do what we want them to do, because we build websites and apps for reasons. And so we're often looking for this overlap between what users want and what the business is actually trying to achieve, what the business goals actually are. And some projects do a better job of defining this than others. But when we think about user experience design, that's really what we're trying to reach, is find this overlap between these things. So I like to think about, we can think about user experience design just holistically, like, do I like this experience or not? But I kind of like to assess the specifics. So how do users actually, what is actually going through their brain when they're looking at an interface or when they're filling in a form? Like, what impacts whether they like the experience or not? And I think there's a lot of different aspects of this. But these are the 6 things that I would look at. So when users are on especially a Drupal website, there's often a lot of content that they're interacting with. And so the actual reading that they're doing to consume that content and to interact, the language that's used, that's a big part of their experience. Like what's the tone of voice of the language? Do they understand what they're reading? Is it like short and easy to understand? So there's lots of just cues that we're giving through the labels in the text that we present on the screen that impact a user experience. Another huge thing, and this might be to me the most important, is predictability. I've done a lot of usability testing, and there's a certain expression that people have when they click on something and it does what they want. They're like reassured by this experience. Whereas if they click on something and then there's an unexpected result, it's always a little bit jarring. You're trying to do something and you click and then you get a surprise. So surprises are not always good in user experience, and so predictability is usually what we want to aim for. Timing is important, and usually when we're talking about a web experience, we want fast. So we want fast loading times. We want also quickly to get to the information that we want. So creating that impression that things are quick is going to user experience. There's a certain comfort level that people want to have. I like it when the font on websites is nice and big. So there's a lot of just general feeling of being at ease with an interface. The branding also contributes to the user interface, and so does accessibility, which is something, of course, we hear more and more about these days. That's incredibly important. So to talk through a little bit more some of these points, I mentioned language. When we're creating websites, we are speaking to a particular audience. And so the user experience is usually not designed for every single person in the world. Usually we're trying to target specific types of people and we're trying to speak to them. And so if you're onboarded on a project, maybe you're just handed a design, but it's nice to be able to know who that design is meant to be. And when you're doing any type of testing or just looking at what you're creating, putting yourself in the shoes of those users can help you figure out whether the language that's being presented is going to make sense to them. Predictability, so building something that feels familiar. So we tend to be, as web developers, like very expert users, like relative to others. So we might be able to easily figure out how to use an interface that's built badly. Maybe you're in the middle of building a website and it's not all finished, designed yet, and you don't mind that it doesn't work perfectly. You might be really good at figuring out websites that have lots of usability issues. But in general, end users who are less familiar with technology, they like to use things that feel like they've used them before. So if you're designing any kind of form or search interface, or you're building out the homepage of a website and it doesn't feel like other other interfaces you've used before, that might be something to flag, like to the design team. Like, are you sure this doesn't feel like other sites? Do we really want to go that far outside of the box that it feels unfamiliar? That I always think about the text and having room to breathe. And then the brand. So branding is something that people do because they're trying to, market. But it also has an important functional role to play. Like having a strong brand actually helps users feel like they're in the right place. If you go to a website and suddenly the colors change and things look like visual design, then you might feel a bit lost. And brand is also really helpful for us as developers, because often in a design, everything is presented to us in mockups or wireframes. There's always missing pieces. So if the brand is well defined and there's already colors and fonts and things like this that have been decided on, it can help us fill in the gaps and make those decisions. So the better defined the brand is, the easier it is for us. And then finally, accessibility. So, a user experience is not going to be useful if people can't actually access content and find information. And so when we're building the user experience, we always think first about the browser, because that's where we live, right? As developers, we're doing our work and then we're testing everything in the browser. But one thing to keep in mind is that you're also at the same time creating a user experience for people that are using assistive technologies. So some people, to see a website, they have low vision and they're using a magnifier tool to zoom into one part of the page. So they might not be using they're using the browser, but not exactly as you expect. And then some people, they browse through a website, but they're using their keyboard instead of a mouse because that's what they can use. And so again, that's a different experience that we're creating as well. And then, of course, when we think of accessibility, we often think of people who use screen readers. And, we don't all have that experience of using a screen reader. We don't necessarily know what that's like. But you can try out using websites using a screen reader. There's a NVDA is a common one. Or if you're on a Mac, of course, there's a voiceover that you can enable to see what this experience is like. And that can help us better build websites that create a good experience on those devices as well. So those are some concepts just to give you some ideas of what creates a good experience. But I also wanted to talk through a few more specific decisions or common issues that you might face. So I'll present a few. I'm sure you all have ideas that have already come to mind. But these are things that I see really, really often in designs. So one thing that I find is super important, and whenever we do usability testing, we run into these types of things. We see that labels and link text are really important, because this is what a user their attention is drawn to it when they're trying to get to the next step. So if you think about when you do a search, you're trying to figure out which search result you actually want to click on. Or if you're presented with a set of cards, this really common design pattern now, we want to see, well, which card is the one that makes sense, and when I click on it, what's going to happen next? So the types of labels that we present in the interface are really important. And sometimes these are things that are actually left out of the design process, or they're not really that well defined. Like sometimes the designer doesn't really realize that you have to make this decision about what those labels and link texts are meant to be. So the first example I have here, the first little screenshot, this is a screenshot from search results. And in the search results, the name of the content types that appear in the results are printed out. And we see this pretty often, that somehow the configuration that we're doing in the back end of Drupal is actually exposed to the end user. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen sometimes. So it's important when we're doing that configuration that we think carefully about the labels we're using, because they're not just for us, they're not just for the content editors, they're actually going to be shown on the screen. And I find this one, like the content type name is landing, like landing page. And I find this a bit confusing. I think as a user, I wouldn't know exactly what that meant, because the word landing page isn't in my common, day-to-day language. And then the second example here is a set of cards. And I find this interesting because the card, each one has a title on it. And then there's clearly this arrow, which I know from using websites probably means, okay, I can click on that thing and it's going to take me somewhere. So that makes a lot of sense. But the question is, as a developer, what should the text be on that link? I know for accessibility that it has to have a text. And so this question of, what should that link indicate? Should the link text just be the same as the title? That's a kind of question mark that this design leaves for me. And so in this case, I would probably assume that it should be the same as the title, and I wouldn't necessarily have a link text field that I would give my content editors. I would just copy that same link same text that's already there in the title. So these are some decisions about language that you might face. Other decisions that we have to deal with are about site speed. So designers these days and clients love adding videos all over the place, and they're using videos more as aspects of the design rather than content. So you might end up with a video that has to actually load on the page before a user even clicks on it, and it's running in the background, and it might make the site feel slower. So figuring out how to deal with that is an important user experience decision. Deciding how much to compress a video, because we like it when videos are crisp and clear, but that also is going to make the page load slower. So figuring out what the best balance is there and really thinking about it from a user perspective. Uncompressed images also are pretty problematic. And content editors tend not to be very aware of the impact of having uncompressed videos. So that's something that we often have to take care of for them. And then some of the things that are maybe less obvious in terms of speed, that it's not just how long a page takes to load that creates the impression of a site that feels sluggish. It can also just be the number of clicks it takes to accomplish something. So if you have to click many times to get somewhere or to fill in a form, this is going to make it feel slower. If you have complicated animations when you scroll down a page, this is also a very popular design trend to just have every component as you scroll down be animated in some way. This can actually make the page feel slower because you're kind of pausing to look at the animation rather than just having a natural, flat scroll like a more traditional page load. And another thing that can make that whole experience slower is if we have to scroll on each page to get to the actual functional part of the page. So you can imagine if you have to click 3 times to get to the form that you want to fill in, but then you have to actually scroll down the page to get to the form, it's going to feel like that scroll is almost like an extra click. It's an extra step to fill in the form. So sometimes these are things that designers present, and they're really thinking about the visual impact of the entire page. And there are things that we can kind of question as developers, like, oh, do we really need this many animations? Or how is this video meant to behave? Like, is it really supposed to be here on all these pages? Should it be playing automatically? Is there a way to compress it? Just kind of asking these questions that are going to have a big impact on that experience of how fast the website is. And then one other thing I would say is often a design decision that we're making is around the actual headings. Often in a design, we just see kind of the results of what headings are supposed to look at. Usually if we're using something like Figma or InVision, we'll have the size of the font that's meant to be used. We'll have information about the colors and fonts and all of those details. But we as developers are often the ones making the call about what the level of the heading should be. And this actually has a huge impact on people using assistive technology because they're using the headings to navigate through the content. So just like if you're using the browser, you might just glance at the page and you can tell what the most important text is on the page, and you read the heading and then you know if that content is relevant to you. So just like that, a screen reader is actually going to detect what the heading level is, and it's going to use that to display the heading 1s to the user, the heading 2s, etc. So actually making sure that the heading levels line up with how important the text is, this has a huge impact on that user experience. And this actually, it's not just, it's something that came from a survey of screen reader users, where like a vast majority of screen reader users say that headings are the most important thing they use to find content. And then user experience, we always think about the user experience of this website that we're creating and spending so much time on. But look, now that I've been part of user experience planning and kind of discovery, and what we often do is think about the experience of a user, not just when they arrive on a website, but the whole experience. Like, how do they even find the website to start with? And sometimes users enter into a website because they got a link from a newsletter, or maybe they had this page bookmarked, but more often than not, it's because they searched for the page, or because they entered a link that they found on social media. So these first entry points, like the first experience that a user has of the website, isn't even on the website. It's actually before that. It's like one step earlier, when they're just discovering the content. And we as developers, when we're designing the markup of a page, we actually have an impact on how that content appears on those other platforms. So the meta tags that we use, making sure that we have a meta tag that is accurate and actually reflects the content, that has the title and an image preview, maybe a snippet of text. This is what is going to actually appear in search results and in social media cards. So making sure that we have accurate content there is really going to help start the user journey off on the right foot, and build that good experience. So those are all things that we can consider as we're doing our development work. There are some things that I find are often missing from design. So we don't necessarily have to wait until we are assigned our task of the day and we're working away to solve some of these problems. A lot of problems we can actually start to solve or dig into at the design phase. So I don't know I don't know about you, but on our team, sometimes there's a developer who gets to be involved in the design process, and they're actually reviewing the mock-ups and reviewing the wireframes before development starts. And the great thing about this is that then you get to ask the designers all kinds of questions, and sometimes the designers don't know, so then we actually talk to the client and make sure that we really know what we're going to implement. So here are a few of those missing things from designs that have a big impact on user experience that I find most often. So number one, links. Often designers just think, oh, let's put a link here. And they don't really think about what the link text should be or where the link should go to. So sometimes these things are really unclear in the design. It just looks like, oh, there's an arrow, it should go off somewhere. So if you're reviewing a design, this is always something to think about, like where is the link going to go and who gets to decide. Controls. So I've seen so many designs where there's just like, well, we mentioned the ambient video before, but like, okay, there's this big ambient video that's supposed to play, or there's a video that's supposed to play in a pop-up or something. And in the design, there's no controls for the video. There's no way to pause or restart the video. And this isn't great for accessibility. And sometimes it's not, it's annoying because users just want to stop the video and there's no way to stop it. And so sometimes those types of things come up in development, but then we need to have actually a design for what that control button is going to look like. So that's something, if you ever see a video in a design, just think about whether there should be some kind of control there. We also see missing controls in other situations. I find often in search, there's things missing that just make the search functional. Like often in a search, you want to reset the filters or you want to submit a search query and there's interface elements missing. And sometimes there's also no pagination in the design, and we know that with Drupal, you can go in and add tons of content and the list of content is going to fill up, and users have to have a way to get to the next page, get to the rest of the content. Forms often have missing design elements because forms are interactive. So forms don't just have one state, as we know, like forms go through validation, they go through, submitting a form. And so it's really important to have that information about what that's going to look like, right? So validation indicators, what happens next, because sometimes there's placeholder text sitting there and there's no label, like in this design. What error messages are going to look like, where they're going to be positioned, and then where the form actually takes us when we hit submit. So these types of things are often missing in design. And so we can ask designers what should happen, ask them for more information. Sometimes this type of thing is in a style guide, like there's actually form elements in the style issue. So that can be helpful, but sometimes those things are missing even from the style guide. This is a favorite one of mine. So whenever I'm doing QA, I always like to make sure I test out these pages. 404 pages, notoriously, people forget to really going to decide what this page is going to look like. It's not one of the top priority pages that they're creating a mock-up for. But then we as developers have to go in and make sure that these pages look good or set them up. And so just making sure that that's something that we think about is important. And the login page is another one. I know the login page isn't always something that we're publicly linking to, so maybe it's not as important. But whenever I go to a Drupal site, I always think, oh, what's the login page look like? And so I might end up there. And of course, that's going to create a better experience for your your actual content editors and your clients. In search, there's often a lot of missing details about what the experience is going to feel like. Not necessarily visually, but search experience, there's a whole presentation we could do just on this topic. There's a lot that goes into it. So when I'm looking for something, the order of the results that I see and whether I can find what I'm looking for on the first page, this really creates a strong impression. So having some indication of how search results should be ordered, that might be coming from designers or it might be coming directly from the client. Also, what gets included or excluded from search results. Sometimes we search for things and then the results end up showing us pages that aren't really meant to be visited, like they're pages that kind of live within other content. And so having some idea of what should and shouldn't be appearing in the results to begin with. And then this one's kind of subtle, like how filters actually map to the content. So I find sometimes when I'm working in a design team, I realize that the designers don't have so much of an awareness of where, like the list of search filter options, like where do those come from? And we know as developers, like, oh, those could be taxonomy terms, or those could be field options. And designers are just thinking, oh, well, what should the filter look like? They're not always so aware of how it connects to the content. So if you have the opportunity to be involved in the design process, really taking a look if there's an advanced search interface at what's being proposed, and then thinking about, well, what do we need to make sure is in the content that this is possible? That's a really valuable thing that you can bring to the design process. So there's also a whole range of decisions that we make that affect the user experience of content editors. And content editors have a whole bunch of needs that we could talk about for a whole hour. They're actually interacting a lot with the website and creating content and making sure that it's compliant and being able to use drag and drop tools. So there's all kinds of experiences that we're creating as we make decisions and as we configure Drupal. A lot of these decisions we're making when we're defining the content structure. So as we set up content types and paragraph types and block types, what those are and how many style settings we add, all of that has a big impact on content editors. And we're also creating an experience as we set up a publishing workflow. So when you create states and transitions, those are things that content editors are using every day. So I won't get into every single topic, but just to give you a quick list of things that we know content editors really love. They really appreciate it when the names of things in the back end make sense. So just like end users appreciate it, content editors do too. So if they can understand the names we're giving to our content types and our paragraph types, that's really going to help them out. It's also important to think about the form display. So we have all these settings for field display and how in our content types, but we can also control what the form looks like. We can enable things like previews and autosave, which we know editors really appreciate. They love the media library, so using that and then testing it, making sure the right things appear in there, that is much appreciated. And then just thinking through the admin theme and the admin roles that we're setting up, this is also really key to that editor experience. So some key takeaways before we close. There's lots of questions that you can ask the design team. And I know sometimes as developers, we feel like, oh, well, we can figure this out. We'll build it how we all. I think it's really worth building a dialogue with the design team, and you shouldn't be shy about asking them questions. and bringing up things that are going to be tricky. It's better to bring them up in the design than to bring them up, later on in QA. So here's a whole set of questions that you can ask about, where does this link to? Where are the missing controls? What happens when I click submit here? One fun one is like, if there's a whole style guide, sometimes it just shows what each thing looks like, but it doesn't show how much space there should be between them. So asking questions like that. And then, asking more about animation, a lot of ideas, and maybe questioning, do you really need all of this? What's the purpose of this animation, or how should it feel? How should the animation make the user feel? And so getting involved in the design process, it doesn't have to necessarily take a ton of time, but just, having some touch points in the project when you can talk to designers, this is really valuable. Maybe you can attend a workshop if there's a user experience workshop with the client. That could give you some good insights. You could also give designers information about the content that's actually available that they'll be able to work with, because sometimes designers just don't realize that there's, maybe there's a vocabulary set up and taxonomy terms that they can use in a search interface. So helping them fill in the gaps there is going to be very helpful. And then asking questions about any interactive elements or missing things from the design, and doing that in the wireframe stage, I think is really a good time to get involved. So that's all that I have for you today. I hope if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Also, just wanted to mention at Evolving Web, we are hiring. I mentioned at the beginning, I have a couple colleagues in Costa Rica who are on working with them. We also have a lot of folks who we sponsor to immigrate to Canada. And so we have colleagues who have moved here from Colombia and Brazil and other places. So if you're at all interested, we'd love to hear from you. So you can find out more at careers.evolvingweb.ca, or you can send me an email. I'd love to. So with that, I will open it up to questions. And I see there is a Q&A tab or a chat tab. I'll take a look at both, or if you have any comments. Predictability is new for me. Yeah, the predictability thing is something that I realized because I did some testing of the Drupal admin UI. And it was the first time I had done usability testing of a backend interface that's got so much functionality. And when especially when someone's creating content, they put a lot of effort into that. Just like you might when you're filling in an application form and you spend 5 minutes filling in a form. And when you click submit, you really want to know that you really don't want a surprise. You want to have a predictable experience. And you see it on the facial expressions of people, which I find really fun. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of the Drupal camp. And I hope, maybe next year this will be in person and I'll be able to come to Costa Rica. That would be amazing. And in the meantime, I'd love to hear from you if you have any follow-up questions or just want to stay in touch. Okay, thanks everyone.
Hola, mi nombre es Karen Méndez y formo parte de la comunidad de Drupal Costa Rica. Estoy aquí para extenderle una cordial invitación al DrupalCamp 2021. Este año también se hará de modalidad virtual en la plataforma de hopping.com, donde contaremos con talleres y charlas de nivel intermedio, avanzado y básico para que puedas aprender más sobre Drupal. También habrá un chat en línea para que puedan consultar todas sus dudas con los expertos. Muchas gracias a los patrocinadores de este año.
DrupalCamp Costa Rica 2021 con la plataforma Hopping.
Mi nombre es Solimar Vargas y hoy te quiero hablar de WeKnow. Somos una empresa que tiene su base en Costa Rica y trabajamos con desarrolladores distribuidos alrededor de Latinoamérica. Nuestro core de negocio es Drupal y nos gusta el trabajo remoto, la posibilidad de explorar permanentemente lugares y de que te puedas mover como profesional continuamente como un nómada y cumpliendo tu trabajo como buen profesional. Actualmente tenemos diferentes búsquedas abiertas, así que esperamos por ti y porque te vengas a sumar a este gran equipo. WeKnow, una empresa para que todos podamos construirnos juntos y seguir siendo quienes deseamos ser como personas en el lugar donde elijamos estar.
We wish we could be there in person this year for this amazing and awesome Drupal camp. Because we're missing out on talking to everyone face to face, we want to share a little bit about our passion for Drupal at Phase 2 and how, in partnership with WeKnow, we make influential digital products that have a global reach. Ask folks at the booth for more information on how we can work together in the future. Thanks for coming by.
I am an enormous fan of Drupal the technology, but I think the thing that I owe most to being here right now, talking to you, is this group of people. Truly this community of wonderful, welcoming, warm, brilliant human beings. And I can remember very clearly the moment where I realized that this is what I want to do with my life. That's a big moment, and it was at a DrupalCon. And so I hope that maybe for one of you out there who are thinking about doing this or thinking about whether or not you can be a developer, give yourself a shot.
Phase 2 y WeKnow han fortalecido su alianza en los últimos años. Juntos, traemos proyectos innovadores y de impacto a desarrolladores fuera de los Estados Unidos. Desarrolladores en Costa Rica y muchos otros países, desde México hasta Argentina. Gracias a esta profunda relación, sumarse a nuestro equipo te brinda una gran oportunidad para desarrollar tus habilidades y ejecutar proyectos de gran visibilidad y profundo significado.
I've been a part of Phase 2 for 12 years, and one thing I'd love to share with you is that one of Phase 2's core values is to share knowledge openly. And this is always aligned with the spirit of contribution found in the Drupal community. Now, when someone thinks of Drupal, they immediately think of the wealth of contributed modules and solutions it has to offer. But the real source of Drupal's staying power has always been the community. Drupal is powered by people all over the globe, including many contributions made by the people here at Phase 2. For 2 decades, Phase 2 and Drupal have grown and evolved together. In the early days, Drupal and Phase 2 found a way to work with nonprofit organizations, local communities, and even charitable activism. It was a way to bring people with a common goal and purpose together. Now, as Drupal grew into a true enterprise platform solution, it really never forgot its roots in that early spirit of contribution. And neither have we here at Phase 2. From hosting Drupal meetups, speaking at DrupalCons and camps all over the globe, writing blog posts of solutions to complicated problems, contributing core patches and new modules. We relish the opportunity to give back to a community that has given so much to others. Drupal is a big part of what we do here at Phase 2, and we value the collaboration and sense of community that is part of Drupal's identity. Drupal in Phase 2 recognize the importance of contributing back to all the communities that we know and love. Mentorship, guidance, code contributions, sharing ideas. These are just some of the ways how tech unites us and helps us to come together as one big community.
No olviden visitar los stands de nuestros patrocinadores y recuerden visitar nuestro sitio web DrupalCamp.cr.